guys, it's Jake with Trickfish, and we are here today with our good friend Darryl Anders. Darryl is a Trickfish artist and an amazing bass player from the Bay Area in California. So thanks so much for being here today, Darryl.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always great to sit down and talk to you. I'm actually really curious to hear more about, your background and your approach to music and sound. And you and I have gotten a chance to hang out, a little bit over the last few years at the NAMM shows and just talking.
Oh,
And I've really enjoyed getting to know you and hearing more about, you as a player. And it's just a real pleasure. So thank you.
likewise, likewise.
Let's just jump in. I've got a handful of questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
And the first one is, can you remember like the moment or the experience where you kind of felt like you fell in love with the bass guitar?
Um, sort of. I was in ninth grade or something, and I went to see uh the Brothers Johnson um at a concert, and I saw Louis Johnson live, and I thought this is the most incredible thing. I want to do that. His sound and his aggressiveness and just like everything about it was cool and different. A friend of my mom's left an acoustic guitar at her house, and it was like under my bed. And one day I picked it up and just started playing around with it. Didn't know what I was doing, but eventually I started picking out bass lines on this acoustic guitar.
Hmm.
And once I figured out that's what I was doing, uh, I asked my dad to buy me a bass, and I got my first bass, and it was off to the races.
You have played with an amazing roster of people over the years, from Booker T to Zigaboo from the Meters, Tower of Power, Ledisi. Can you remember on a gig or just like working with an artist that you felt like was a really profound, like watershed moment for you in your development as a player?
I think probably one of the biggest moments was um, when I did the Tower gig. Um, I got the call to audition. That wasn't really my thing. Like I didn't grow up playing a bunch of Tower Power music. I mean, I'd heard it, I listened to it, but I didn't really dig into the Rocco thing in my own playing. So I had to really work to learn that music and basically locked myself in the house for a couple weeks and just didn't do anything but play that music over and over and over. And once I did that and did the gig, I felt like, okay, I can do anything if I put my mind to it. So,
Yeah.
I had been playing for quite a while at that point, but still to go and do a gig at that level, um, it changed a lot.
Those are like such big shoes to
Yeah.
fill, and also such a specific stylistic
It's
player. And
very specific, and the 16th note thing,
yeah,
it'll wear your hand out, you
I was
know.
gonna say that's what I was gonna say is I imagine the amount of stamina that it required.
Yeah. and
Yeah.
and having to learn that music and get it under my hands in such a short amount of time was um really a challenge. I didn't listen to any other music. I didn't play any other music.
Yeah.
I probably spent 6 or 8 hours a day working on just that. And then when I got to the sound check for the first gig, Mimi says, "What songs do you know?" And I named a couple songs. And then he named a couple other songs that I'd never heard before. So I had to learn
Hmm.
them on sound check, and then 2 hours later play them on the show. So it was a great learning experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sounds like muscle building for just the experience of being able to think on your
Yeah.
feet and be, adaptable and jump in with both feet.
The other thing too is I realized in the process of doing that gig, we played a big festival in Japan, and I've been stressing myself about, you know, don't make a mistake. You got to be totally focused. And I remember walking up to the stage thinking to myself, you know what? You've practiced this music, you know it. Stop thinking about it. Just do what you do and have fun and enjoy the moment. And once I relaxed into, okay, I'm just going to go up here and do what I do. And
Hmm.
it was from that point, it was easier. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that concept of just kind of trying to take a breath and be like, I'm not gonna sound like Rocco. Rocco sounds like
Right.
Rocco. I'm gonna sound like me playing this music, and that sort of can take some pressure off this like expectation or pressure we put on ourselves, especially if it's a setting like that where it's such a a seminal artist with such such deep roots, with their sound and their thing, and it's like you couldn't sound like Rocco,
No
that
matter what. Yeah.
specifically, no matter what. So you might as well just sound like you playing it, having fun, being you.
I've learned that if you learn the music, you respect the music, get the parts, you can put too much pressure on yourself trying to be, exactly,
Yeah.
what the person is. Like you have to leave room for yourself to
Hmm.
be creative. And as long as you respect the music and respect the parts and arrangements, it's usually pretty good. And that's helped a lot.
Yeah, I agree, man. I think about that a lot. Playing is it, I do a lot of playing with a tribute act, and it's hard music, and it's like I'm never gonna sound like that dude. So
Yeah.
if that idea, that concept of like, man, if I approach it with just a respect and familiarity and reverence for this music, and I play it as myself, that's going to be the sweet spot.
Yeah.
But I do think it also takes this like particular kind of ego presence to be able to thread that needle of playing someone else's material with a lot of like respect and integrity and but also just being able to be yourself. Like it's a sensibility that's like a very not necessarily like a learnable skill. I think it's just like kind of a sensitivity that some people have because they
Yeah.
have the mindset, and
Yeah.
anyways, I digress. I wanted to ask you, man, when I listen to your stuff online and some of the recordings that you're on, I love your sound and your tone so much. And
Mhm.
I'm curious how you think about like finding your sound or like creating the tone that makes you happy. Like how do you think about approaching that when you're working with your sound?
Um, to be honest, that was the last part of the equation that I focused on. I um didn't understand the importance of sound and developing a voice and all that stuff till much later. Um, your style is sort of a combination of all the things that you hear that you learn. I think in the 90s, I had the worst sound ever. It's like a ton of low end, a ton of high end. I
Yeah.
was blowing tweeters like crazy. Um, and I didn't understand the beauty and the importance of mid range.
Hmm.
Um, and a good friend of mine, Scott Shiraki, used to always tell me about mid range. Like if you learn how to focus on that, it can really change your sound. And also playing passive instruments. Like I was always an active bass guy. So uh, a few years ago, I got a bass, a Sembec, which I know you know, and it's a passive jazz bass that just sounds amazing. And so there's not a bunch of knobs and stuff. The
Yeah.
tone is right there. It's in your hands, it's in the bass. And just the volume, passive tone control thing, I had to really focus on, okay, where are the sounds? It just made a big difference. I wanted to have a bigger, rounder, almost more classic bass sound. Like I started getting away from, you know, more modern basses with, just a ton of knobs and switches, and just really going back to that sound that I heard when I was a kid.
Hmm.
So um, probably about 10, 15 years ago, I really started focusing on sound and my sound and finding my voice. Probably for the last 25 years or so, I've recorded most of my gigs just to see, like, what are people hearing in the audience? How can I
Yeah.
make what I'm doing better? And that was a great thing for really helping me to understand the mid-range thing, because the earlier recordings, you hear this, a lot of woof and zing, and you can't really hear the notes. Like there's
Yeah.
no note definition or articulation. I'm like, I'm loud as hell. How come I can't really hear myself? And then once I got that thing together, it's like, okay, now, I can, wrap around the kick drum, but still have the notes be clear and articulate and focused. And
Yeah.
I really want to support the music.
Hmm.
If I'm doing a gig and somebody comes up to me and says, "Man, the band sounds great," that's infinitely more important to me than, you know, you sound great as a bass player or you played a great solo.
Totally.
So
Yeah,
I'm
man.
not really a solo guy anyway, but my job is to make everybody in the band feel supported and be a part of a conversation and make the music feel good. So um sound is a big part of that for me. Like having a sound that people, they know where the downbeat is, they know where the chords are because the bass is locked in. It makes it so much easier for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, man. It's just the clarity of like the role within
Yeah,
the band. Yeah. That's really great. Well said too.
thank you.
Um, another thing I was thinking about when I was getting ready for this conversation is just, you know, you've been a professional player for a long time and had all these amazing gigs with different artists, but you've also worked in the industry for a long time
Hmm.
and with MXR and Dunlop. And I'm sure in that time you've interacted with so many players, so you've had this experience both as a player, but also like supporting artists and kind of working
Hmm.
with them. That's a really interesting and unique perspective. And like from that perspective, like what is like a really great piece of advice that you would give a player who is really committed to getting the gig, to keeping the gig, to, having longevity in their career? Like what is one piece of wisdom that you would share having worked with so many players over the years?
Well, there's a couple things. One, be open to as many types of music as possible, whether you personally like it or not. Um, if you just the more tools you have in your toolbox, especially as a bass player, um, the better because you never know what gig you're going to get called for. You know,
Hmm.
so the more information and understanding you have about different forms of music, the better. Um, so you got to have your playing together. But equally, and sometimes more important than that, is being a good hang. Show up
Hmm.
on time, have your gear together, be somebody that other people want to be around. Be pleasant, joyful. Just if nobody wants to be around somebody that's grumpy and pissed off all the time, that seeps into the music, and it is an absolute drag. So even if maybe this isn't your favorite gig, bring your A game to it. And when you're not on the stage, be somebody that people want to hang out with. People would rather have a guy who is maybe not as good a player as the next guy, but they like him and they get along with him and they can depend on him. Whether,
Yeah.
if you're a prima donna and you think you're the greatest player in the world and you're kind of an ass to everybody, that won't last long. It doesn't matter how good you are, you
Yeah.
know.
As you're talking about it, I'm thinking too, like, I feel like that's more and more true the higher up
Oh yeah,
you get,
absolutely.
where, by some of these guys that are working with big name acts or like legacy artists, it's like, man, everybody's great. At that point, everybody's a great
Yeah,
player. And really, it's like if you're not easy to work with and fun to be on the road with,
yeah,
that's like not real valuable. That's not real, attractive to people at that place in their career where they have the freedom to make those choices and create the vibe they want to have night after night, day after day, and night after
yeah.
night.
And the people who have the good gigs, who keep the good gigs, are those guys. They're solid players and good people, and they don't cause problems. My other thing that I do with Dunlop and MXR is artist relations, and the guys who are the easiest to deal with are the really great players, like the really
Yeah,
top tier. Like they need what they need. They're super easy to deal with, and most of those guys have become friends over the years. No matter where you're at, you got to be humble and appreciative for things,
yeah.
and not have expectations. That's my personal
That's huge,
thought.
man. I was lucky to learn that when I was young and I was in my early 20s and I had the fortune of getting to interact with some really big name players and I was like, all these guys are so chill
Yeah,
and easy and they're
yeah.
just nice people that care about other people and the relationships they have. And it was like a really good time for me to learn that as as you're in your early 20s and trying to figure out what it's going to take to kind of like build a music career.
I probably told this story before, but I went to the Warwick Base Camp a few years ago, and there was a, a moment where I was sitting at a table with Rhonda Smith and Lee Sklar, and there was probably very little discussion about bass specifically. We talked about music, we talked about life, we talked about just all kinds of stuff, and we were sitting at that table for like, I don't know, 6 hours or something. And then we realized like, oh, we got to go. But that 6 hours felt like 15 minutes.
Hmm.
And I remember in the middle of the conversation thinking, I'm sitting with Rhonda Smith and Lee Sklar. And this is a moment I will never, ever forget because they're just regular people. They have the same issues and concerns that everybody else does. They just happen to
Hmm.
play bass. And that's a moment that I will treasure for my whole life. Just I learned a lot that day.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. Well, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Um, and that is, so you've been with Trickfish for a handful of years now, and
Hmm.
I am curious just to hear a little bit of the story from you about how you got involved with the company, like what your experience has been like using that gear, what kind of things it's made easier for you, what kind of problems it solved, just generally like how that's working for you in a professional setting.
I was with another amp company for a long time, and um, the gear was great. And then the Trickfish thing came along, and I think my initial reason for leaving was I just wanted to change. I'll say
Hmm.
that. And when you use a piece of gear or for a long time, that becomes your sound, and you really get used to it, and doing anything different is kind of challenging because you're used to what you're used to.
Hmm.
um, when I first got the Trickfish, I noticed it was different, and I had to kind of get used to it. I went kind of back and forth, and then finally I said, okay, let me just dig into this stuff and see what it does and how. And I realized that the Trickfish sound was bigger, and just setting the EQ flat, it sounded right. There was nothing missing. I didn't have to have a lot of EQ to make the bass sound good, no matter what bass I was using. Um, there wasn't a whole bunch of sparkly, high end. Like I always say, I don't like fairy dust in my bass tone. I want it to be clear and articulate, and want the low notes to be round and full. And the Trickfish really does that better than anything else I've ever used. Um, the entire line of products, it just sounds musical and it sounds right. And I don't have to do anything to get a good sound. It's just I plug in and play, and whether
Hmm.
it's the Mini 500 or the 3K, they make it fun to play, and I don't spend time turning around twisting knobs.
Yeah.
You know, it has made me um, really appreciate good tone. Um,
Mm.
I on the few occasions I've had to use something else, not not fun. Even if I go to gigs that have backline available, 9 times out of 10 I will bring my own stuff because it sounds great. It sounds right. It sounds full. Um, it's very durable. I haven't had any problems with the gear, um, and I've been using it for I don't know 7 or 8 years now.
Hmm.
Um, and another really important thing for me is if I have if I'm going to use some gear, I want the gear to work and be functional, but I also like to have a relationship with the company or the people who run the company. So, you know, Justin and Ryan are really good people, and
Hmm.
it's a small company, but because it's a small company, they really care about the products. They're both bass players, so um, I personally believe that bass players make the best gear for bass players because they understand our role in the music.
Yeah.
You know, they understand what you are responsible for when you're on the gig. So um, I am proud to use the gear. It sounds great. They're great people, and I think it's just a matter of time before people really understand how amazing this gear is. And it doesn't sound like everything else, but it just sounds right. I mean, that's I keep saying that it just sounds right. You know, and
Hmm.
I had a gig recently. I was playing a wedding or something, and the guy who was the soundman, I hadn't seen him for years. And after the gig, he came up to me. He goes, "Man, I wish every bass player in the Bay Area used the gear you use because your bass just sounds so good." And I thought, "Wow, that's a huge
Nice thing to
compliment."
hear. Yeah,
You
that's
know,
that's great.
it makes playing music fun.
I mean, that's really it, right? It's
Yeah,
like
it really
I
is.
I find that like the best gear for me is the stuff that disappears and
Yes.
I don't have to think about it when I'm playing,
Yeah.
whether it's it's true for basses, like the stuff where my hands just sort of I stop negotiating with this thing and I just am
Yes.
able to play. And it's the same with these with amps, with cabinets on stage where it's like if I can the less I'm thinking about what's happening with the sound, the better. Because it's
Yeah.
just that means it's like a non-issue and I can just focus on what I'm doing. And I'm so picky about sound, but I'm not finding myself wanting to do anything and just going, great, let's just go. Let's just play.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's been so nice to talk to you and learn more about you and hear kind of your insight on all these things. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me,
No,
and
anytime.
I look forward to seeing you at the next NAM show or the next event where we can cross paths.
For sure. For sure. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daryl.
All right. Take care.